sticky situation.
Yeah.
What a funny story, Mark.
Yeah.
We're joined today.
Go ahead. Take
No,
the
I
lead.
won't step on your. You clearly want to do like the real intro to this podcast.
Yeah, go for it.
Do it.
Pressure
Come on.
Oh,
button.
you want to do the real intro? I thought that was the real intro. I thought that was our thing now.
So today we're going to be discussing the Skinwalker.
Oh, hell yeah, bro. I walk in
Welcome
skin
to
every
the
day.
Weeb Crew, your favorite
Welcome.
anime podcast.
Where we spend 5 minutes talking about pig's blood.
Yeah, man, it's the real
I'm your host, Mumi, your local Texan. Join with me as always is Psiotic, Ghost,
Yes.
whatever you want to call his ass.
Co-host and producer and executive producer of the Weeb Crew podcast now.
Damn.
I don't know what that means.
Damn.
It means
Motherfucker busy.
less work on my end, hopefully.
And today we are joined by a licensed medical expert, Jayden from the Cynic Clinic.
Yep, that's me. My name is Dr. Jayden Cynic, MD. I specialize in fakeology, and today we're going to talk about I don't know.
Well, that's how we know you're a fake doctor. You introduced yourself as doctor and then MD.
Yeah, I got both, okay?
You only do one or the other.
No.
Yes.
When I graduated, they were like, "You're so good, you get to choose. You get
You're
both."
so good, you get to do it twice.
Yes, I'm both.
You have a
I'm both
doctorate
a
in
doctor of
doctorism.
philosophy. Yeah, exactly. I'm both a doctor
I
of
see.
philosophy and a
A
medical.
double,
I can't
a
do
double,
both.
double specialization.
Exactly.
And today we're just going to be talking about what makes a good anime adaptation.
Ah, yes. The thing that's on everybody's mind.
The thing that's on everyone's mind. But first, I don't know. So for people who maybe aren't like, I don't know, as familiar with your content, Jayden, do you want to just like give like a bit of like an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Oh yeah, sure. So yeah, I have a YouTube channel. Obviously, I probably wouldn't be on here if I didn't have a YouTube channel. Have you had non-YouTube people on here before?
I think everyone we've had on has had a YouTube channel. So
Yeah, the closest would have been William, which
Okay.
he's well known for not his
Yeah.
YouTube channel, but he does have a YouTube channel.
yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
how we found him, through his YouTube channel. So
Right.
yeah, we didn't intend to only have content creators on, but that's sort of just how it's turned out.
That's how it goes.
I mean, we have been reaching out to people that
Yeah.
aren't on YouTube. Hadn't worked out for us quite yet, but if you have someone interesting, send them our way.
Oh hell yeah!
Tell them you want to be on this shitty podcast.
On the Weeb Crew podcast. Hell yeah. Yeah, no, I have a YouTube channel talking about like mostly anime. It's generally focused on, I focus on production a lot. I also focus on the kind of relationship between, well, I think that's why I must have been invited on. I often talk about the relationship between the like source material and the final product. And often how serendipity and just situations, you know, the what happens to be involved with the production may end up influencing the final output, and how that's ultimately something that should be celebrated, because some of the most, it's just like, you know, the thing is, anime is ultimately made by people, and and their hard work and all the challenges they have to go through, and that. Also, I like to swear, and I like to distort my voice and zoom in on my face and pixelate it at least 4 times per video. So, and
Don't you get complaints about doing that?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I still
There's
do.
at least one comment to being like, "Do not do that."
Yeah, it's like, can you stop it with the like really? Can you stop it with like the like jump scare jokes with the distortion? And I'm like, fuck you asshole.
All right, now we've peaked the audio. I'm gonna. Oh, this is gonna be a nightmare. Well, it's interesting because like when we do have our guests on, we do try to like think of like, well, what's like a topic that we could have them on to like discuss.
Yeah.
So for Joe, that was a bad idea.
We tried.
For Gil, we talked about isekai and shit like that. It was like, well, we're friends with Jayden here. We're like, should have him on. But well, what topic would we do? Well, he's made quite a few videos talking about anime adaptations in one way or another. So yeah, that seems like a good topic.
Yeah, it's a good song too.
Yeah.
By Blondie.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the movie, the Spike Jonze Andy Kaufman movie adaptation.
No, I was talking about One Way or Another by Blondie.
Oh, okay.
As far as I'm aware, Blondie did not have a song called Adaptation. Yeah, so adaptation. What makes a good anime adaptation?
What makes a good so yeah, are there like I guess yeah, it's kind of a broad question. So let's like try and like figure out like a place to start. What do we look for in anime adaptations a lot of the time? Do we want something that's like, I don't know, faithful, I guess, to the source material, something that directly adapts it, or maybe something that like deviates? Because like obviously you've talked about like stuff like Trigun and Dragon Ball and how, filler in those stories basically, and how that's kind of, in the case of something like Trigun, makes absolutely no sense.
Yep.
Because you have stuff like Trigun where I've not seen the original. We've been watching the new Have you seen any of the new Trigun?
No, I haven't yet.
I think that's also, Mumi can probably speak more to this. I think that also deviates pretty heavily from the source material.
From what I've seen, I'm not an expert in the Trigun manga, but
okay.
I know it deviates heavily from the original anime.
And the original anime deviates quite heavily from the manga, but in a way that like, from what I understand, is can't really skip those deviations because they're integral to the story.
Yeah.
Which is something I think a lot of people don't really recognize when talking about filler.
Yeah, well, filler, I talk about filler a lot, and filler is its own beast, right? And I think the word filler and the culture around filler kind of gets to the idea of, it's a complicated thing to answer ultimately the question, what makes a good anime adaptation, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of a broad thing.
It's a broad thing. First, I want to tackle the term faithful, because that's what most people would probably say, right? They would say it should be faithful.
What does that even mean?
It's hard to quantify what faithful means.
Right,
because I think a lot of people, it's like, it's for a lot of people, especially as time goes on, the word faithful means one-to-one transliterations, right?
Yes.
And you get certain situations where, I think, it's really hard to tackle it. So first, something I want to acknowledge, first of all, is when people say good anime adaptations, they're almost always referring to manga to anime adaptations, right?
Yes.
Because
no one really cares about light novels.
Yeah, not in the same way. And it's because manga is much more visible than anime. Like, anime is adapted from a whole host of sources. It just so happens that manga is the next most visible. In Japan, it's arguably more visible. Like, more people read manga in Japan than anywhere else, right?
Sure,
Then, more people read manga than watch anime in Japan, at least. But it's probably the second next visible, and then light novels are increasing, but still it's much lower. And then you've got novels and films and games and all these other
visual
kind of
novels,
right?
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and it comes down to manga to anime adaptations are put into, I think, people have a lot of expectations for them.
Yes.
A lot of the time, I think, unrealistic expectations.
You look something like Chainsaw Man, for example.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's because that's come back up again because a guy got fired recently. Well, not fired, but he's not coming back for the next season, right?
Okay.
Yeah, the Chainsaw Man. That's a good example, right? Of what do you call faithful, right? The biggest problem people have with the Chainsaw Man adaptation, because the Chainsaw Man anime is pretty faithful in terms of rendering the story.
Yes.
The almost every scene in the Chainsaw Man manga, well, of the chapters that it adapts, is in the anime. Maybe there'll be a panel or two, or like a little snit, bit missing, or a bit expanded upon.
Right.
But they're pretty much always in the actual anime itself. The story content itself is quote unquote faithful. What people mostly were complaining about was the direction,
specifically how it was handled in a more grounded filmic style.
Yeah, the shot composition was for the most part framed more in a way of if there was an actual physical camera in the space, right? You can tell that from the opening alone that they were going for a cinema angle, because the OP is just nothing but a bunch of references to classic cinema,
bunch of references to movies,
Yes, and just the way the shots and everything done is closer to how you would approach it in film. You've got the different layers of the camera effects, trying to simulate, motion blur, depth of field, bokeh,
wide angle lenses.
Wide angle lenses, all those kinds of things. Personally, I liked it, and I think it's faithful in the sense of the panels are pretty, in a lot of cases, 1-to-1. Like the composition is adjusted to fit a 16:9 frame, but it's generally pretty damn close. The exceptions being the action scenes, which are more dynamic and go for a more like free-flowing 3D camera, which I think benefit the most from it. But a lot of people didn't like it because of that grounded. Yeah, they didn't like that filmic approach.
They were expecting something more akin to like the covers of the Chainsaw Man manga, where it's very like vibrant and aggressive and colorful.
Oh, the EDs, because there's a different ED for each episode, and they're all wildly striking and creative. And I can understand to a degree why someone would want that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with dislike. And, you can dislike whatever you want. Like, it's not against the law. If you dislike something, you dislike something. That's fine.
Yeah.
But people call Chainsaw Man unfaithful to the manga. And I disagree because, like I said, I think like if you're talking about the story content, shot composition, everything like that, it's very, very faithful. So what most people mean when they say it's unfaithful to the vibe, it's unfaithful to the mood. And in a lot of the time, it's what they think or feel the mood or the vibe is, Yeah,
their sort of perception of the story.
Yeah, the nature of manga also as a black, because you could make that argument, right? People want the more colorful, vibrant things of the covers. That's the cover. Manga, by almost most manga, is a black and white medium, right? Where you're encouraged to fill in the gaps of the white space, with your own imagination.
Right, you as a viewer are sort of doing more mental work, effectively, to tell a story in your head.
Yeah, and so you can't really be it's hard to be unfaithful to someone's headcanon. You know what I mean? When everyone has different headcanon of what it means. So Chainsaw Man's an interesting one because especially compare it to something like Bocchi the Rock, right? Which aired at the same time. I have a video on Bocchi the Rock's adaptation. Yeah, check it out. It's pretty good if you haven't seen it.
There in the corner?
What's that?
Oh, just up there in the corner.
Up there in the corner, yeah.
He's building that parasocial relationship.
Yeah,
yes, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
Up there in the video, up there in the corner, unless you're listening on anything except YouTube.
You're our friend. You're our friend. Now, look, I need to borrow some money.
How was your day? Tell us about yourself.
You want to pass me a $5? I need to...
What do you think is a good adaptation?
Exactly.
Leave a comment.
Leave a comment down in the web zone.
Just do it like should do these like a choose your own adventure novel.
but for like a podcast.
Yeah, like for a podcast. And it's like you just put it in the comment and it's like, what do you want Jayden to say next? And then they vote on it.
Click on a fucking link and it just sends you to a private video.
It takes you to a different video. Some people do that.
That's it.
Yeah, something like Bocchi the Rock, which we also have a video on talking about it as an adaptation.
Yeah, and funny enough, both those videos did relatively well compared to the rest of our content.
Didn't they come out on... Did they drop on the same day?
Yeah, they did.
They're within like 2 hours of each other.
Yeah. They were close. Yeah.
Completely uncoordinated.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't planned at all. It's just him.
Yeah, but, like those Tenketsu videos. But yeah, Bocchi the Rock.
So Bocchi the Rock, which is a much more. That's something that people still call it. I think a lot of people still call it faithful, right? Because again, the story content is very much represented. If anything, the anime expands on a lot of the story content.
Yes.
They add again, this is where you come back to that filler term, because there are scenes in Bocchi the Rock that aren't in the anime. Like I think of episode 5. Episode 5 is adapted from about 5 or 6 pages of material. I can't remember exactly. And so they add a lot of scenes, expand a lot of scenes in order to make the episode structure work for an episode structure. And Bocchi the Rock's as an anime is famous for its visual landscape, right? Like everyone, you got the bocce shriek, you've got the turning into 3D and hitting a bunch of cardboard boxes, the
media mix angle.
Yeah, the media mix angle, and even just like the regular, like just all the different variations in the style of the adaptation, a lot of which break from the aesthetic of the general aesthetic of like
the sequence where her hand is like going all wonky.
Yeah. And the manga does that too, right? The manga does break it, especially like in terms of like bocce faces, when bocce's having like a mental freak out,
Right, It'll sometimes even like break the panel itself.
Yeah, and often the shot composition isn't a direct literation of the panel. Often they rearrange it to be more dynamic or more interesting for the, whatever. But the story content is still there. The character essence is still there. And it's not beat for beat, but it's there. And a lot of people still call it a good adaptation, myself included, right? And they would call it a faithful adaptation while still being its own thing. There is a fundamental difference, I think, in the way that Bocchi the Rock is perceived and Chainsaw Man is perceived. And I think this gets to the heart of the problem of calling something a good anime adaptation, which is that most people discovered Bocchi the Rock through the anime first, whereas Chainsaw Man's manga was famous for years before the anime was announced. That has a big impact. It really does, especially in terms of like the broader fandom and community response to it. Because if Bocchi the Rock's manga had been as popular as it is now, or as the anime is now before the anime came out, I think it would still get a lot of those praises, but I think the reaction might have been a little bit different. There would have been a lot more.
You might have had
a
more negative crowd.
Exactly. Yeah. More people who have this preconceived notion of what the show should look like. Because that's what they want. That's what they're used to. And part of that is, there's a thing that's inevitable with it, right? Because most people tend to, people are obsessed with being like the original. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the way it's even worded when people like write like an essay or they make a video or they talk about it, they compare it to the original. Usually it means if it's a sequel, the first movie, or if it's an adaptation, the first adaptation. But a lot of the times that language and because of the way, we think of things, usually the first thing we interact with, the first one we see becomes the original in our mind, even if it's not.
Right.
Like I always think of an example, like I hated the 2017 adaptation of Kino's Journey. I hated it, right? And I made a video on it 5 years ago now. God.
Yeah, 2017 is 5 years ago. 6 years ago now.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
We had the same moment in the last episode.
You're just gonna do this every episode at this point.
Yeah. Oh God. I was gonna say, well, like another good example of that would be Fullmetal Alchemist 03 versus Brotherhood, or Hunter 99 versus Hunter 2011.
Those are good examples.
Interesting about those is like Hunter 99 and Hunter 2011, like they adapt the material very, very similarly.
They are the same story, effectively.
Right. Fullmetal Alchemist 03 and Brotherhood deviate from each other quite a bit.
Very different stories by the end.
And those are good examples too, because like I was going to say with Kino's Journey, when I talk about it and I compare 2017 to 2003, I call the 03 Kino's Journey, right? The Nakamura Kino's Journey, the original. I say, oh, that wasn't in the original, this, that, and the other. But really, the 2003 Kino's Journey is not the original. The original is the light novel.
Yes.
The 2003 Kino's Journey is the original anime adaptation, for sure. And maybe it could just be being pedantic there. But it itself is an adaptation that takes its own liberties and approaches to it. It just so happens that's the one I saw first. And so, and Brotherhood and Hunter x Hunter are good examples too. You see this a lot with like anime that are getting more faithful adaptations of the manga. And what that means is the story content,
Fruits
right?
Basket.
Yeah, Fruits Basket is another example
of that.
Yeah. And then it'll be the original versus the new one, when really the original is not the original. It's the first anime adaptation. The original is the manga, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that with a lot of them, it depends on like Fullmetal Alchemist is an interesting example, because I remember when Brotherhood was airing, because that's how old I am. I remember when Brotherhood was airing, and a lot of people didn't like it, because they were comparing it to 03, because like they were the old school fans, right? And they like 03's story more. They liked the way it approached directing and scenes, and deviated from the manga, but that was okay because they liked the way it deviated, and they thought that which I think there was an element of it's darker and edgier, therefore it's better kind of logic in there, because 03 is darker, right? It's bleaker than Brotherhood.
Except for Shambhala.
Yeah, except for Shambhala, which we don't talk about Shambhala. But fucking Fritz Lang. Anyway, but so that argument was having, but now the defining take you see is that it's the opposite way around, where Brotherhood is better than 03, and the defining reason people get is because it's more faithful to the manga.
Right.
So I think that shows because now that it's all aired and the dust has settled and people who get into it from the beginning, people who didn't watch O3 back in the day, right? They weren't the original fans and they haven't watched anything and they want to get into Fullmetal Alchemist. They're going to see that Brotherhood is the more faithful, quote unquote, adaptation of the manga.
It's the highest rated thing on my anime list.
Exactly.
I think it's a lot of people's first exposure now.
Yeah, and so because of that, they go, oh, that's the one that's more accurate to the manga. I'm going to watch that one because it's more faithful. It's the better adaptation. I think that's the underlying assumption that people make, right? And I think a similar thing happens with Hana Hana, any sort of Fruits Basket, any anime that has that sort of approach to it.
Even Trigun recently as well. I don't really like the new Trigun either, but I also haven't seen the original, so I have no point of comparison. But a lot of people who I saw, especially when it started, were complaining about how like Vash looks different, or some of these characters are different, or some characters are just omitted entirely for seemingly no reason.
Yep. And that's the Trigun's another example because a lot of people don't realize how different the original Trigun anime was from the manga.
Right.
Yeah, and it's the exact same phenomenon happening. So that's adaptation in terms of story content, right? In terms of if you read the synopsis of what happens and the difference. And then there's the other thing I think that goes into an anime adaptation. And again, we're talking about, this is largely been focusing on manga and anime, which is when you're adapting something, you are changing its medium.
Yes.
Right? Or changing its format.
That's the biggest thing for me.
And for me, that's the biggest thing, which a lot of people don't really talk about because the focus is always on the story content.
Right.
And with manga and anime, the lines are blurred a little bit because they are so similar. Because
they're very they're historically very closely related.
Yes, they're very tied. The manga designs and anime designs are almost identical. Anime designs will be a little less detailed, a little more streamlined because they need to be fucking animated. Of course,
need to be drawn multiple times.
Yes. But for the most part, there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of people who draw manga have worked on anime and vice versa, right? There's which you compare that to say comics and Western animation, where there isn't really an overlap of the two industries, right? They're kind of separate. Drawing for comics and drawing for cartoons is very different, and it's treated as different. Whereas in Japan, it's all part of the kind of the same machine. So because they are similar, and because I always think of how manga and anime fans can be very, very spoiled because really, even ones that aren't that accurate, even if you take, say, Fullmetal Alchemist 03 versus the manga, right? If you compare that to the average, Western adaptation of a comic book, especially at the time it was made, it's remarkably faithful, right? It's the characters look the same, the parts that are adapted from the manga are shot for shot for the most part,
and people get really mad when a Marvel movie deviates too much from the source. What was it? It was Iron Man 3. People were pissed off at because a character was different from what it was in the comic books or whatever.
Something like that.
I haven't seen these. I haven't seen.
Yeah, there's
these
about 500 million of them. I'm not sure.
I don't know the first fucking thing about comic books. So.
Yeah, with Marvel movies are interesting because it's in a way I think some Marvel fans. I mean, maybe it is. Well, I don't know what it is, but sometimes they just get happy if characters from the comics are included at all, even if their interpretation is completely different. They're just like, oh shit, they were in there. I remember when The Suicide Squad came out. And people were like, oh shit, it's Polka Dot Man.
Oh, the second one, okay.
Yeah. The second one, The Suicide Squad, right?
The Suicide Squad.
Yeah, they're like, it's Polka Dot Man. As if that's someone to be,
Who the fuck is Polka Dot Man?
Yeah, Polka Dot Man, yeah. And it's funny too because you look at DC and you look at the way that sometimes the popular interpretations of or the popular adaptations of comic book material ends up becoming the more popular variation. You look at the thing I always think of is Mr. Freeze from Batman the Animated Series, who took his just original cartoony card carrying villain boring character and made it into something much more nuanced and interesting, and then that's become the preferred version of it. Especially manga that comes out now, I don't see a lot of anime manga fans giving them that amount of leeway. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's like, oh, it's just different, so yeah, it's bad. So they are similar, but they're different, right?
Right.
And so you get like weird situations where it'll be like I always think of that My Hero Academia panel that people complain about, where it's like it's a panel of 4 characters striking a pose.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
They're striking a pose, and then the anime does the exact pose, basically. It's stretched a little bit.
Slightly different.
It's slightly different, and people just lost their shit.
People lost their minds, and there's no way to like show this for a podcast, but there was another panel where it was like 3 of the villains walking away from like I'll put this up on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and you look at it in the anime, and it's completely different in the anime and kind of removes a lot of character of the panel in a way that I think is, a detriment. Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets. Instead, people were arguing over the anime making a character's bust size larger, even though it didn't.
Yeah.
So,
and so there's a lot of that going on. And it's not even like the argument of, because that's what people focus on, because that's the part of manga and anime that's the same, right?
Yes.
Where it's like the way that anime and manga differ is, well, okay, manga uses panels. Panels can be of any dimension, They're generally they're generally rectangular, but they don't have to be. A lot of the times they're rhombus, or like they can be any shape, really.
Sometimes they're over like the side of the page, and then
and like it can be closer to like a 16:9. It can be a square. It can be like a vertical rectangle. It can be slanted.
Sometimes
it can be the whole page. And you've got a variance.
Just be the same size panels over like 4 times.
Yeah, like Yonkoma, right? Yeah,
Yonkoma.
And it can vary so much, and the art of manga is making it so that the page flows, right? The way your eye moves and flows across the page, and to have the maximum effect. And sometimes, usually when you go to a full page panel, it's, oh shit, something big happened, right?
Right.
That's not how anime works. Anime is whatever the aspect ratio of the entire show is, whether it's 4:3 or 16:9 or anything else, right? And so with anime, it's about similar to film, it's about the relationships between the cuts. It's about, movement. And in anime, it tends to be, horizontal or vertical movement. It's about the layers. It's about what shot, reverse shot, the Kuleshov effect, And so it's more about the timing of the cuts, rather than trading the size of the panel, you might trade the length of the shot or the direction of the shot. And no one really, people don't factor that in as much, maybe just because they're not aware, they lack the language to talk about it, or because that's not what they
or something that works more subliminally. It's not something you're really supposed to focus on.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's something that's more important to an adaptation to me. Outside of just the mediumic stuff, why Bocchi works so well is because it has that pace down. It has that pace between quick cuts, long shots, close-ups, wide shots, all the different things you can do to add variance and pace and tempo into animation, the direction and movement of the shot. Audio is another thing, because people
that's
often just focus on the video.
Component.
But that's a whole new component of like anime, And, people do think about that. Of course, the most obvious one is, do they get the right voice actor for the character,
Right.
And do they get, how does the music sound? How does the sound design, feel and that kind of thing? I've never seen people like focus so much on 17-year-olds' breasts as My Hero Academia fans,
Yeah, completely random, arbitrary things to focus on.
And it's kind of weird, right? It's just like
like you do know that they're not tracing the manga, right? When they make these, But it's interesting that you bring up like the first thing that you are exposed to in this sort of franchise, effectively, is what in your mind sort of becomes the original.
Yeah.
And that sort of colors your perception over everything else within that franchise. A good example, I've seen no one fucking talk about this, is I know, Mumi, you've seen it. Have you seen the Tatami Galaxy?
No, I've seen Night is Short, Walk on Go.
Night is Short,
the
okay.
same characters, but I haven't seen Tatami Galaxy.
So what's interesting about the Tatami Galaxy is that it's regarded as, one of the greatest anime of all time, whatever the fuck, one of Yuasa's best anime.
Yep.
No one addresses the fact half the anime is original.
Mm-hmm.
It's a novel adaptation, but the novel, because the way the story is structured is every episode is a new timeline, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So, the novel only has 4 loops, but the anime effectively has 10. That means 6 of those loops, more than 50% of the show, are anime original. And that's something I've never seen anyone talk about. No one talks about, the Tatami Galaxy being like unfaithful or has a lot of filler or anything like that. And it's because, one, people have not fucking read the novel.
Yeah.
I think the novel only got a proper official English translation fairly recently. I think last year. And, a lot of people haven't read it, so they're not really thinking about that fact. So it is sort of your cognitive awareness of, is there even an alternative to begin with to compare it against?
Yeah, I think that's and I think that's obviously the fact people haven't read it. It's much less popular, compared to say like manga, and less readily available, right? I was going to bring up like light novels and just novel adaptations in general because people do seem to be, well, just in general, right? People are more willing to accept differences in adaptations from novels to movies or animation, right?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, but again, before I get into that, it's I think it is about like what you perceive as the original, what you were first exposed to, because Oshii's Ghost in the Shell is not very faithful to the manga.
No. It is very different for a variety of reasons.
Incredibly different. Innocence is even less faithful, right?
Yeah. Innocence is it's barely related.
And it's interesting how, that's not the only reason. The only reason, like the fact that it's what most people are first exposed to in terms of Ghost in the Shell is a factor. Yeah. It's not the factor into why, people are fine with how different it is. Another factor is not many people have actually read the manga in full. Ghost in the Shell as a franchise has embraced more than a lot of other manga have, or a lot of other anime like franchises has sort of embraced the fact that each adaptation is its own distinct thing, which helps it as well. But I think, it's a fact. It almost also goes the other way. Like Oshii's Ghost in the Shell is so different that it almost goes beyond the event horizon, and people are able to kind of accept there being 2 separate Ghost in the Shell. Move it in their mind.
Yeah, it's like it becomes so different that you're not you're like, well, it's pointless to fucking compare them. Yeah.
And I think that's something with the Tatami Galaxy, and I think why light novel and just novel adaptations in general, or film adaptations, TV adaptations, whatever you want to say, why they tend to be people are less caustic and immediately critical about the changes is because there is that kind of implicit understanding that they are just going to be different, and they're able to substantialize them in their mind. Because you've got a few things, even if you look at like, say, a traditional novel to a live action movie, right? Not just the medium is changing, obviously going from all text to visuals and audio. The format is changing, Like a book is designed most books are designed to be read in a way that you can stop reading them at like generally at the end of a chapter, right? But if you have to go do something, like you're on the bus or whatever it is, you put the book down and you go do something else, right?
Yeah.
And it's meant to be this cumulative like experience, whereas a movie is designed to be watched in one go for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And so the way that you have to structure the two are very different. Or if you're adapting a series of books into a movie, or if you're adapting a book into a series, like chapters can be analogous to episodes, but the structure of a chapter is different from an episode because not everybody reads at the same speed, but everyone watches, unless you're a fucking maniac and I've seen these people who watch like anime or whatever at like ×2 speed,
Yeah, times 2 speed somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, like everyone's going to watch, like 20 minutes is 20 minutes for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so you have those format changes, but the medium changes are, I think, even bigger because, like I said, text is different from audio and visuals. So if you're talking about good adaptation, and being faithful, it's taking advantage of the things you can uniquely do in those mediums and trying to find ways to reference or try to capture the essence of the unique parts of those mediums. Example I'm going to bring up is Haruhi.
Okay.
I think Haruhi is a fantastic adaptation. It's obviously, again, that's an example where most people know the anime first. That's the original in most people's minds, even though the light novels came first.
Yes.
There are a couple ways that I think Haruhi captures the essence of the uniqueness of the novels and adapts it, puts it into the anime format that works really well. The first one is that in the light novels, Kyon's the narrator, right? It's written from his perspective. Something that sticks out is that during dialogues between people, often his dialogue won't be rendered with speech, like quotation marks, right? And so it can be hard to know, and because of the way that the show is written and the things flow back and forth, it can be hard to know if he's actually speaking or simply thinking it. Like if the characters are actually reacting to what he said, or if it's his expression or whatever. There's also the unreliable narrator thing going on. But it's never 100% clear if he said it or just thought it, right? As a unique part of reading the text and, everything like that. You can't really do that in the anime, but what the anime tries to do is that they'll try to have either shots of from his point of view, right? They'll try to have a pulse shot, or they'll do a shot of like the back of his head. You can't see his mouth moving, or a shot of something else where you can't see his mouth. And because of the way Haruhi doesn't do the 4Kids thing where someone's thinking, so they throw on 500 layers of reverb to show you that it's their inner thoughts, right? They just record the audio as if it, is the same as someone speaking. So it kind of captures that same feeling, right? I think it's a little less obvious because, again, it's like more of a subconscious thing, whereas it's more immediately noticeable in text because you're actually looking at it and you go, oh, there's no quotation marks. But it captures that same essence and adapts it into a new medium, taking advantage of audio and visuals. In terms of format, too, I think Haruhi is a good adaptation, especially the first season, because all of the main story light novels are in chronological order. Like if the whole novel is a story, right? If the whole novel is from start to finish the same chronological story, those will, the release order is the same as the chronological order. But a lot of the Haruhi light novels are actually collections of short stories, like individual little adventures that they have. And those individual adventures can be set anywhere, right? So the third light novel, for example, has a lot of stories that are set between the first light novel and the second light novel. The fifth light novel does the same thing. They're set between different parts of the story, right? All of the little individual chapters. And when they were adapting Haruhi for the first season of the anime, only a few light novels had been released. And they were only going to do the first light novel in its entirety. And they realized that if they just did it in chronological order, that they would run out of, like, the peak of the story would be over, and then it would just be a whole bunch of, like, random, like, monster of the week, basically, right?
Right.
And so they restructured the episode's order so that those individual stories from later were inserted in between the episodes that tell the main story of the first light novel. And so it's told out of chronological order, but that main story, all those episodes are shown in chronological order, like as in part 5 of the first light novel isn't shown before part 4. You know what I mean? And they weave it in a way that they still capture that kind of half anachronological feeling without it being 100% anachronological. And I think that's smart application because most people, again, like anime production then, even now, compared to other mediums, now where everything's just thrown on Netflix and you watch the whole series in a night, most people are watching one episode a week, right? In the same way that you're going to read one light novel at a time if you started from the first one. And
right.
if you read the first one when it came out, right? You have to wait for the novels to be released. So I think those are just a couple ways where you can capture the essence of both the story content, the uniqueness of the medium, and the uniqueness of the format.
What I think is interesting about Haruhi is like, as an adaptation, it kind of does exactly what you would want an adaptation to do, in that it like really capitalizes on its medium to try and present the story in a way that translates it but still kind of keeps the feeling of it. But there are things that are like lost in the translation, because like the fact that it is a light novel is very integral to the story of Haruhi, where I kind of talk about it in the first video we ever did, where I'm talking about like the dual kind of interpretations, where people kind of, where the whole like kind of debate comes from of like who is like the god in Haruhi, or like the source of the events of Haruhi. And that's made a lot more nebulous, and like it's a lot more clear in the light novels because it is coming from the perspective of the protagonist of Kyon.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not necessarily as prevalent in the anime, because it is presented as an anime. But it's just something that's kind of inevitably just lost because of the translation to a different format.
You're exactly right. Like there are things you cannot have a perfect adaptation, right?
Of course. So, that makes no sense.
Yeah, but in terms
it
of
is an adaptation.
Yeah, you lose something along the way.
It brings up an interesting thing with like you talked about Kino earlier. The original Kino's journey is like light novels are very popular with like younger kids. And then when Nakamura did the adaptation back in 2003, he kind of did his own thing with it, where he adapted it quote unquote faithfully, but he adapted just vignettes that he felt would be interesting for the anime format. Where when was it Taguchi came in and did like the 2017 adaptation, he didn't like curate the arcs that they were going to be adapted into the 2017 version. No, they did like a whole and then they did like the most popular ones, and so that's reflected in like the light novel readers, because they were interested in seeing like the story of Shizu and Riku and all them. So that lot, like half of the 2017 adaptation is just stories about them.
Yeah. And then that's part of the problem, because Kino's journey 2017 is Kino and Shizu and Riku and Photo's journey. Yeah.
But it brings up like what it brings up like what is what is a good adaptation to people, because like to light novel readers that might have been a good adaptation because it adapted the stuff they were interested in from the light novels, whereas the 2003 version might not have been, because it was adapting just vignettes that were just not really building on any of the plot of the story.
Well, it does to a degree, because some of I see your point. I would say that like they are vignettes. So all of Kino's journey is vignettes, right?
Right.
Really, I mean, there is a through line, of like Kino meeting this person, that person.
I just mean like relatively.
Yeah, you know. I know what you mean. They do keep one important thing, which is that you don't, what most people consider the most important or the most memorable Kino story, Kindland, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, is also the episode where you find out where Kino got her second gun, right? She gets from the gunsmith in the town, right? And there is something where it's like, because it's very strongly, it's emphasized in the first light novel a lot, and then you find out the end of the second light novel where she got it. That's, again, in terms of I think this is good adaptation, because the first episode of Kino's journey highlights her second gun a lot. It shows her quick drawing it a lot, and like putting it together, cleaning it, and someone's like, oh, that's a nice gun. She's like, oh, yeah. And then you only find out where she got it in the last episode, adapted for the TV series, It's also, I think, something that's nice about 2003 Kino's journey is that each light novel, each individual volume of the light novel is bookended by two different stories, right? It's by an A and B kind of epilogue, prologue that are connected to each other, and you get the half of each, right?
Right.
Whereas the same thing is done in 03, where it's bookended by one of those short vignettes at the beginning of the very first episode, and then the very end of the last episode. They do some of those vignettes in 03, but they do them in individual episodes, which again is fine. That's not necessarily the wrong way to do it. But talking about whether that's, I think again it ties to the idea of like, it would 17 be a better adaptation for the light novel fans. I don't know. Maybe it was. but I think the way that it's done as a curated pool of the best of is less of it's a better light novel adaptation and more it's a better adaptation for those fans because they've internalized the story. So they don't need the structure. They don't need the flow of everything. For them, maybe what they wanted was basically Family Guy funny moments on YouTube, you know?
Yeah.
Where it's like the best of highlight reel. Family Guy funny moments only works for fans of Family Guy already, you know? Not for someone who wants to actually just watch an episode of Family Guy, which, I mean, from what I've known of Family Guy is basically now already Family Guy funny moments. But you know what I mean? Like in the sense of like watching a compilation on YouTube is not the same as watching the show, because watching the compilation implies knowledge of the structure of the show already and internalization of the logic and flow of the show. So it is nebulous. There's no way to really say this is what is a good adaptation, because it depends on what you want.
There's definitely something to be said about like this whole conversation is very much like confined to like the last 10-15 years or so, because nobody really talks about, you know, going back to like Akage no An, no one talks about how that very much that would be considered today like filler stuff, because it does adapt the full novel, but the full novel is not really long enough to fill 50 episodes. So there's like
pretty short read.
There's like there's some things in the novel that are kind of just like mentioned that they fill out to be a whole episode in that. But no one's talking, like, no one's going to like shit on Akage no An for being like, oh my God, this is so drawn out. It's like filler. They should just adapt it into like a 12 episode TV run. And then likewise with like Rose of Versailles and like Onisama A, like those, while they're pretty accurate as far as like the actual events, like tonally and like what Dazaki kind of removes from the manga changes it pretty drastically, where it, like Onisama A and Rose of Versailles were both done by the same mangaka, and they're both very kind of like lighthearted in their presentation. Like Oscar is like kind of this really starry-eyed, like young kind of happy protagonist, and Dazaki really leaned more into like the drama of it for both those adaptations. So arguably it's not really all that accurate to the manga as far as like its tone, but you don't hear anybody like really propping up the Rose of Versailles manga and Onisama A's manga over the adaptations.
Yeah, there is definitely recency bias going on. And I think that's because, well, now you have people like, let's say someone gets an anime, right? Especially like a modern anime fan. Someone who gets an anime and say they get into Rose of Versailles, they're going to have access to both the Rose of Versailles anime and manga at the same time, right? And if they're probably going to pick one, but if they end up doing both, they're going to read it in such close proximity that they'll be like able to kind of separate them. Versus say, if you're already an anime manga fan and there's a manga that you really like and you've been reading it for years now, and then the anime adaptation gets released, you've already built up those preconceived notions. And not just you, but I think the importance of fandom can't be downplayed, because I think there's a lot of, like with the Chainsaw Man debacle, there'd be a lot of people who powered through the Chainsaw Man manga immediately after the anime or before the anime or whatever it is.
Right.
And they didn't know anything about it before the anime came out, and they dislike it, or they maybe think that's a bad adaptation because everyone else thinks so. And I'm not saying that you're like that means you're like weak-willed or an idiot or anything like that. But like you now, not only when you do that, you don't just have what you see clearly in the differences between anime and manga, you have the YouTube videos, the Reddit posts, people on Twitter, the reviews, like you have all of the fandom. And all of that information is immediately now visible to you as well. So even if you hadn't built up that level of those level of expectations and protectiveness of your favorite property, which is again kind of inevitable to happen, you can see what everyone else has already outlined and detailed that's wrong with it, quote unquote wrong with it. So yeah, I think it's just the way it's developed. Something else interesting that you don't see as much anymore, but you used to see a lot, was the mainly only with like the really big figures in the industry, but the self-adaptation, because the Nausicaa Valley of the Wind movie is different from the manga.
Yes.
It's very different, right?
Stuff like Akira.
Yeah, and Akira is another example, and it's like,
Akira,
but are you able to say
Arian.
those aren't good adaptations if the decisions in adapting were made by the person who created it in the first place?
Made it?
Yeah,
Yeah. That's something you don't really see at all nowadays. Like, a mangaka generally is not directing an adaptation of their manga, effectively.
And part of it is probably for the best because, mangaka and animators are already overworked, so trying to do both at the same time would probably be like fucking...
And it's good to have a new perspective on the story as well. I
agree.
Like we talked about, in a video that is definitely coming out one day, we have a video on Summit of the Gods and how that's a French adaptation of a Japanese manga and how sort of a fresh set of eyes on the story helped put together a movie that is a very streamlined adaptation in that Mumi, didn't you say that it removes it's a 4-volume manga. Mumi, didn't you say it removes the middle 2 volumes effectively?
Oh, it's 5 volumes, but they're very large volumes. Like they're omnibus kind of volumes.
Right.
And yeah, it removes because which admittedly you can remove it. I don't know. It kind of does change the story, but they are kind of quote unquote disposable, if you want to put it that way. But it is the whole arc with the is it Nepali kind of criminal underworld and kind of them getting to just being able to climb the mountain kind of thing. They cut all of that out just to kind of focus on the core, kind of story of it.
Distill it down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that I can imagine being very difficult if you're adapting your own work in order to see it from a different perspective. Cause if you're adapting Nausicaa, if you're Miyazaki adapting Nausicaa, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I can't fucking remove this. Well, because I put it in there for a reason.
It brings up an interesting thing because there's the whole, the muddied kind of story of Kare and Kano and how she's very much on record that she wasn't, happy with how it was being adapted by Ano. Because it wasn't, it was kind of leaning more into the psychological elements and the darker kind of tones and not really keeping up with the kind of happier kind of thing that she had in the story.
I think it was also she was unhappy with the more comedic bent that Ano was taking. I don't know if I'm misremembering that.
You have a similar situation with Oshii and Odisei Yatsura, where Rumiko Takahashi does not like Oshii's stuff.
Well, Odisei Yatsura brings up an interesting thing because not many people are defending the manga. People prop up the original anime more so than the manga, and so when you talk about
they watched that before they read it,
right? And then also because of the cult of personality around Oshii as well. But
Oshii as well, yeah.
Then you get people that are comparing the new adaptation, which is much more accurate to the manga, to the original anime adaptation, as opposed to what the source material was.
I'm going to tell a bit of a tangent here, but I think I still do a bit, but I used to work in advertising, editing ads. And most of the time when you're making, especially an ad for the internet, you're asked to make several versions. The most common one is a 60-second and a 30-second version, right? But I had a couple clients who they would even, especially as time went on and YouTube's, especially if they were making ads for YouTube, you'd have to make a 15-second version, 10-second version, a 5-second version, Yeah. And I don't if anyone I don't know if anyone's an editor or content creator or anything like that, trying to make trying to make a version of your work that is less than, you have to cut more than 90% out of it and still have it tell the same story and get the same message across is fucking hard, man.
Yeah.
It's really fucking hard.
Well, I kind of do that with our reviews, but a lot I had to do that with the shorts because you have to kind of condense the shorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard enough to do that with your own thing because you know your story inside and out, which is why it's sometimes, yeah, like you said, a fresh perspective can be necessary. Because I've done things before where I'd go to like a coworker or even just like a friend or whatever. Can you have a look at this? It's like, I can't think of anything to cut. And they look at it and they go immediately, oh, no, cut that. You don't need that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, because you've become so internalized and you understand every facet of it that you don't see the broader picture of what the average person is going to see. And so I think that can be necessary. It's not an enviable position to be in because then you become the person who's massacring the original vision. But I think that can be important. I think talking of adaptation and that specifically, the opposite problem is also prevalent. And it's something you don't see as much anymore because you look at something like Dragon Ball, a show I've never talked about ever on my channel, the Cynic Clinic at YouTube. So you see this in Dragon Ball because, Dragon Ball is, especially Dragon Ball Z, is infamous for, being very long and for the episodes stretching out and for the fights going forever and nothing happening and all that. And I think some of it's exaggerated, but, the fact of the matter is, especially once you got to the sort of meat and potatoes of the show, once you're in the middle of the Frieza arc, the pipeline was one chapter, which tended to be 11 to 12 pages being adapted into 22 minutes. And a lot of people I know when they read the Dragon Ball manga, they're surprised by how fast it is. Because, and part of it is because, again, people read at different speeds, right? But the Toriyama's paneling is so good and it flows so well. And because there's huge chunks without dialogue, and when they're just fighting, you'd be like, oh shit, I go through that like immediately, right? But again, the show, 22 minutes is 22 minutes, and especially if they're stretching that out and they're adapting it. I've talked before in how people complain about Dragon Ball having filler. Most of the filler in Dragon Ball isn't the traditional story filler, where it's like, a filler arc and they've got to, defeat the filler arc villain. It's like padding, like battle filler, where they just add extra scenes and extra, techniques or extra things they do in the fight to like pad out the length of it. And that style, you don't really see that style much anymore, right? Like the only real one that still does that is One Piece, That's the only one that still kind of operates by that logic of the manga is still being released and you make like a chapter per episode, or I don't think it's exactly that anymore, but you know what I mean? Where it's
I think they're really like stretching it out right now.
Yeah.
From what I've been told.
Yeah. And you don't really see that because you even look at like the rise of the one core anime, I think, has ultimately been a good thing because you don't have that problem anymore because it's like, okay.
You don't really have filler, like a lot of a lot of anime original content and something like My Hero Academia.
Yeah. Or you don't have a lot of padding, like the infamous case of like Goku and Frieza's fight, I think is like 19 episodes or something ridiculous, You don't really have that kind of stretching anymore because you don't need to. And like if it's successful, you just make a second season where you continue where you left off. And so that's been good in that sense, right? In the sense of you don't have to you can mitigate the amount of quote unquote filler because they still put in filler, because there's going to be anime original stuff because of the way that the scenes work, right? Like the way you put it all together. Because like even look at like, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc and Bleach, how it's being released one core at a time, right? And they're going to do it. And the pace compared to like Hueco Mundo arc Bleach, oh man, the pace is insanely good, because they don't have that problem of having to catch up to the manga, of having to just basically have a chapter, a couple, like a dozen pages worth of material to adapt in 22 minutes.
In order to like pump the brakes because we're catching up.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's done a lot to mitigate it, but then again, maybe that also fuels the impatience and the spoiled nature to a degree, because I think even if people didn't like filler 20 years ago, it was a accepted evil, because they caught up, right? They caught up to the manga. It was just an accepted, people like, oh shit, here's a filler arc. That's what it is. What it is. If you do a filler arc now, I think people just have no patience for it,
or something interesting right now is going on with Osama ranking is that it has a new season that is airing right now,
Mhm.
but it's all side stories.
All B-sides.
And I've kind of joked that it's like an omake anime
Hell
effectively, because
Yeah.
you'll have like an omake chapter in like a volume,
Mhm.
tankobon release for a manga. It's like a little bonus, or if an anime is like successful, it'll, at least back in the day, it would get like a bonus OVA with maybe a bit more like more erotic content, packaged in there with like your Blu-ray or DVD release.
Yeah.
This new season of Osama Ranking is kind of like that, in that it's a lot of like bonus stories that don't really clearly fit into season 1. But it's 10 episodes of that. It's
Are they
very
full
strange.
22-minute episodes?
Full 22-minute episodes.
Okay. That's kind of like, because you still see that like some, like especially like with One Core or whatever shows where it'll be like they have like a companion O&A of like 2-minute, like usually much more limited.
Reincarnated as a Slime do something like that?
Yeah, Slime did it. A lot of stuff does it. My favorite was Shoujo Shumatsu Ryoko, because it would be them in school learning about like in like a regular like middle school, and they would just be learning about like random shit like fish.
So
usually
like,
it'd be tied
there's
to
a
the
similar
episode
thing
or
with like
something.
Attack on Titan that is exactly that.
Yeah.
You can kind of say
so
Nisei
that's
Monogatari
interesting.
does that same thing. Like Nisei was kind of all just like shit
Yeah.
posting on his part.
A little bit, yeah.
But it's interesting. Like we talked about like earlier, we talked about the creator kind of adapted adaptation or whatever, and having like a new set of eyes. Like I guess kind of getting into what we think is like a good, bad kind of like concrete examples, like the Fruits Basket adaptation.
Mhm.
I'm not like the biggest fan of the original adaptation,
Okay.
Mhm.
but I liked that one more than the new one.
In part visually,
and I feel
from
like
what I've seen. I think the people might say the original, the first adaptation looks worse.
like the designs. So it's interesting because the designs in the new one, because anyone that's not really privy to like the production side of the 2017 adaptation of Fruits Basket, the mangaka is actually like heavily involved with that adaptation.
Okay.
She's not like directing it, but she is being like directly kind of like referenced in the production stuff, where you could argue that she's like kind of making directorial decisions and taking those away from the director,
as opposed
Or
to
at least
Akito
being
Daiichi just doing whatever the fuck he
executive.
wants.
Yeah.
So like you kind of get this weird sense of like there are things that are made more important in like the 2017 version that are clearly kind of more important to like her, because like the adaptation, like the designs are closer to what she envisioned, and she didn't like the original designs because like she thought her art was bad and she thought she had improved, and so the new designs are kind of more what she wanted. And then like there's stuff with like the colors of like Kyo's bracelet. That was a big thing to her in about the original anime, and like so she made a big deal about it for this anime. But like you end up with like this kind of more stale production, where like there was like an episode where they came into like a room and like I forget somebody's dad. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Kyo's dad, but I don't remember. But they go into like his room or whatever, and like to like set the atmosphere, there's like they kind of changed the lighting, but not really. And then like they had like a record player in the background that was like really wonky, just like really like poor attempt at like creating a certain atmosphere.
Right.
None of that was in the manga. It was just like, okay, like they don't have like a very strong sense of like pathos and direction in the new adaptation, but it does adapt like material that the old one obviously didn't get to. But a lot of people do like the new adaptation because it does cover those new story beats, and like because in the manga, like a lot of what people liked is later on in the story.
Which is also
So that-
that's something to be also said. There is another element. It's not just like, oh, it's like the original, like it's closer
Yeah.
to the manga, right? Therefore, it's better. There is an element of when like a new adaptation gets announced, where it's like, oh, I now get to see the parts that weren't adapted and that I liked or that like developed as the story went on.
Yeah.
And it can just be the logic of like, oh, more of what I like is good, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's like a thing.
Something
with, like,
I just
me for,
remembered
like,
now.
well, that's like a
sorry,
thing
go
with
ahead.
me for like Fullmetal Alchemist 03. I like Fullmetal Alchemist 03, but
Oh yeah, me too.
so much of what I love about Fullmetal Alchemist is not in 03, but it is in Brotherhood. And like so many characters, so many like elements.
Oh yeah.
Plot
All the
beats.
PogChamp moments are in Brotherhood. All the most
Yeah,
PogChamp
see, I'm one of
ones.
those weirdos that prefer 03.
03
What
just
the
makes me feel
fuck?
sad.
Yeah, he just gets to the end. And you're like,
I'm just,
"Ooh."
oh god, I'm just gonna want to
I
fucking.
kind of like the bittersweet ending of like 03. I mean, I'd kind of ignore the movie.
Yeah.
'cause
Because
it didn't exist when I watched it.
Yeah, the movie is the movie.
Yeah.
The
I
movie
mean,
is not
it's fine.
bittersweet.
No, it's very much just like kind of pandering because
of-
people
kind of
wanted a certain kind of
insane.
ending.
Oh,
Yeah, I was gonna say I felt like the original. Like it is easy to clown on it, but it does like when you're looking at it from like what they had to work with and what they did with it.
oh,
It
definitely.
does take like the elements that were given to them and does utilize them really well and create something that like almost like I don't know if Arakawa gave them kind of a rough idea or outline of where she was going, or like maybe she took inspiration, or maybe it was like an element of both. Because like when you think about it, like the ending, spoilers for Full Metal Alchemist, I guess, but like the ending of like 03, where he kind of like uses alchemy to like exchange, like he uses the experience he gained through their adventures and uses that to like switch his body with like Al's body at the gate, and then he just like reforms himself over at the other side of the gate or whatever. And then that's kind of taken in Brotherhood, where like he kind of just literally takes the gate that was inside him and trades that for Al.
Right.
yeah.
And so like you get like these kind of like parallel, like kind of similar elements, and it's like I'd wonder where it kind of came from, you know?
It's one of those things where I kind of always wondered, because there's not a lot of time between Fullmetal Alchemist 03 and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's like Brotherhood was
No.
like 2009. It would have been in
Yeah.
pre-production probably through 2008. 03 I think ended in 04. So there's like a 4-year gap there before, and it makes
Yeah.
me wonder, was this always the original plan effectively?
Probably not. Like I think it is just because like back in the day, Fullmetal Alchemist was like really huge.
yes.
And like it did really well for Bones. And so I imagine like when they heard that Fullmetal Alchemist was ending soon,
yeah.
they were just able to capitalize on it and be like,
Mhm.
hey, people love Fullmetal Alchemist. Let's just pump more Fullmetal Alchemist out there.
That's
Do it again,
I think
baby.
that's just a happy accident there, because like you look at other manga that get the same treatment. Like you look at like Fruits Basket or like Trigun with now. Like Trigun
Yeah.
has been over for however many.
It's been
fucking
years. There's
And so I think that was just a happy accident. It does
Yeah.
bring up an interesting question though, which is like, if a manga is still ongoing, which a lot of the time when they get adapted they are, especially even now in the one core kind of thing, it's like, well, what should you do? Because
Yeah.
it's like you have a few options. You could do the Fullmetal Alchemist 03 or the Fruits Basket way, where you kind of make up your own ending so that it itself as a self-contained product has a narratively satisfying ending. You take the most common approach now for like one core shows and end it at a point that is satisfying enough, but is still like, basic, like, if you want more, buy the fucking Blu-rays so we make a second season, please. Or otherwise you just have to read the manga, right? They just kind of stop the story at like a point that seems relatively satisfying to do so in.
Yeah.
Or you just don't do it, and then you have to wait until the manga is finished and then adapt it fully. And all of them come with pros and cons. The last one gives you the most literal, accurate way to adapt the story in its full. But by that point, especially if it's like an ongoing series, you've got situations where it's like, the anime can significantly boost the popularity of the manga. Just take Demon Slayer, for example,
Mhm.
That shit didn't really kick off until Oh well, the anime came out obviously, but like,
Demon
it wasn't
Slayer,
until
even
the
Attack on
movie where it
Titan.
exploded. Yeah, Attack on Titan.
Oh god,
you know?
yeah.
You know, it's like by the time if Attack on Titan didn't have its anime adaptations and they came out after, now with how the way that the manga ended and how much people hated it and its popularity having waned,
Yeah.
would they have been like they would have been able to adapt the whole story faster in its entirety, probably in like a big 2 or 4 core season, but would there be enough interest in it? You know?
Yeah.
So it's like you have to the other two the other two ways are the what they have to deal with, and it's just there's always decisions that have to be made, and like I think something too, like the idea of something being the original, you have to think like things are changed all the time during the production of a movie or production of an anime, production or whatever. There's almost no. I'm convinced that there are very few art projects in the history of art of mankind where it ended up exactly as the original intention was, you know? Because it's like, or even like the original script, like 'cause things just change. You come up with a better idea on the day, or on the day the fucking thing didn't work, so you have to do something else. And those things are changing all the time. And like, you know, it's like always fun to read, like, you know, like about like, oh, like, you know, if you read the mangaka or you read the script writer and like, oh, at one point we were going to kill this character off, but we decided not to. Or at one point they were going to be revealed to be evil, but we didn't do it. Or, you know, any number of things. And that's interesting from, oh, wow, what could have been way. But like, you've also got to think like, well, if that was in the original product, right? Then people would be saying, oh, it's in the original, so it's better. It's got to have it like that, you know?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, an interesting thing to look at for that would be Evangelion.
Yep.
Because Evangelion obviously is an anime original,
Mm-hmm.
but Sadamoto was there during the production meetings and like they discussed things that they wanted to do, you know, in pre-production that ended up not making it into the anime.
Yep.
But then he went on, when he made the manga adaptation, went on to adapt it the way that they had discussed kind of closer in the production meetings.
Yeah, and and in a weird way, the manga came out before the first episode aired, right?
Right.
So you end up in this weird scenario. Ava's an interesting thing just because Ava ends up, I think, falling into, especially with the rebuilds, into the Ghost in the Shell camp where it's, okay, you just end up having different ways to, it's less so because it's less extreme. But
a good example of that would be like Shinji Ikari Racing Project.
Oh my god,
it's just completely different. It's almost like a reskin of another story with Evangelion on top of it.
But just Ava on top of it. Yeah, it's like a fan fiction for the episode 26 alternate universe.
Riding his baloney pony. Fucking dumb.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, the other thing too, you've got to think when you adapting something of an older time, and where, you know, let's say you're adapting an older manga, and there are things in that manga that are no longer considered okay, no longer considered socially acceptable.
Yeah,
you
like
know, it's like,
what was the fucking? I'm trying to fucking remember. Hold on. I'm gonna pull this up. Give me 1 second.
Jamie, pull it up.
Jamie, pull it up.
Jamie,
where the fuck
Jamie,
is
pull up the offensive memes. Jamie,
pull up the
offensive meme compilation. It's 16,000.
It's a G. There's a G in the name. It's two dudes.
I really knows it down.
No, god damn it. God damn it. Where the fuck is it? I'm floundering right now. It's in here somewhere. It's in my fucking. Banana fish. I don't know why I said there was a G in it.
Oh, banana fish, yeah.
There was a G in it. I swear. There's no G in it.
But an interesting example of that would, of course, be Banana Fish. Have you seen Banana Fish?
Mm-hmm. No.
Banana Fish.
Like the first episode.
Banana Fish is an adaptation of an 80s manga, an 80s like BL manga.
Right.
And of course, the adaptation was like, I think 2018. And oh boy, is there a lot of rape in that anime.
Yeah.
Hell
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So see, that's the thing. Like you look at like, you know, you even have to look at like Berserk. Like you think of like the 97 Berserk. which is the only adaptation people really like, right?
Yeah.
That tones down the amount of rape to leave it to basically just the one at the end, which adds a lot more, or a
lot more oomph,
more power of it. And people get edgy and defend the rape in Berserk, and I love Berserk. I think Berserk's great. I think it's really good.
Sure,
there's a lot of rape in Berserk.
There's a lot of
that rape's not necessarily necessary to the plot. Sometimes it's like, bro, did the horse really need to attempt to rape her?
Yeah.
And you got things like that. You got things like like a lot of old even like the use of trans characters.
Oh, yeah.
Not even trans characters, but like a hot woman, but then it turns out she has a penis.
Yes.
In like old 80s gag manga.
Yeah, a good example of that would be like Stop Hibari-kun.
Yeah, and like a lot of that stuff where it's like, do you adapt that? Because you've changed that.
Yeah.
You piss off
how do you navigate that effectively?
How do you navigate through that, right? I think the answer is just don't do it.
Yeah.
Just don't adapt it, especially if it's not important to the plot.
Yeah.
Like Berserk has enough rape that you don't need to include every single rape in the plot, right? You have to include the main rape because that's vital to the story.
But I have often wondered, man, what if we got like a Ninja Scroll style, Yoshiaki Kawajiri adaptation of Berserk, and what a waking nightmare that would be.
Oh man, that would be fucked.
That would be what we call too hot to handle.
Yeah, too hot for TV.
Jamie, fund it, Jamie.
Fund it,
Jamie.
Get him out of retirement.
Yeah. There's a lot to go in adaptation.
That kind of begs the question, are there things that are just, one, impossible to adapt into anime, and two, are there things that maybe just shouldn't be adapted into anime?
Well, people claim Berserk is the unadaptable manga, but that's if you want to adapt it in its entirety as it is in a manga. Which,
right.
Yeah, of course it's unadaptable. It's just unfeasible.
You're not going to be able to animate that amount of line work.
It's perfectly adaptable. It's just going to be in a different format.
Yeah.
The structure is going to be different. It's going to have to be distilled. There's going to be a whole set of compromises you have to make. And it's whether you're willing to make see those compromises in the story itself. Given Berserk fans, I'm going to say they're not going to be willing to see those compromises because they're going to want absolutely every detail in there. It's like, no, dog, that ain't happening, chief. Yeah. I don't think there's anything that's necessarily unadaptable. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of how much you adapt it into its new,
I think an interesting
new format.
An interesting example that I know you'd be familiar with is like Yotsuba. Because Ozma has gone on record to say, Yotsuba wouldn't really make sense as a TV anime effectively, so it doesn't really make sense, to adapt it. So you have situations like that where it's maybe not necessarily because of like Berserk with like graphic content or being too dense or whatever.
Yes.
Well, they just famously had a really bad experience with Ozumanga's
that's a
adaptation. Myth. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I thought that was.
No, it's a myth. He thought it was fine.
Yeah.
He just said he didn't think it works. He didn't think Yotsuba would work for TV format.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which I have not read Yotsuba, so I don't know. You two have. Is there any? Do you think there's any credence to that feeling?
I can see it. I think the closest anime I can think of to it would be like Barakamon. And then maybe maybe Usagi Drop. But
yeah,
that no, like those. I think you can make Yotsuba work.
See, there's a case of like you adapt. You don't adapt the second half of the story, and it makes it a lot better. I was gonna say like Yotsuba works extraordinarily well as a manga, but I don't think you couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
The author has expressed his wishes that he doesn't want it to happen, so it probably won't happen, and it's fine. You gotta respect that. But it's like, I think you could do it.
There's nothing really about Yotsuba that's like, this cannot be captured in any capacity in an anime.
Yeah. Well, it's like that. Like there would be stuff that's lost, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because Yotsuba as a manga, and I have a unique experience with Yotsuba because I've only ever read it in Japanese.
Oh.
Yotsuba is, I think, a manga where you can just take it as slow as you want. Typically, I find that reading manga is a very quick experience. I tend to, especially if it's a long series, you tend to blaze through the chapters, right? You just want to get through the shit, get the dopamine,
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason, like, kids don't buy Jump, right? They just go to the convenience store and try to read it as quickly as possible so they can get, the gist and then go,
Right.
And they don't have to pay for the whole fucking thing, right? But with Yotsuba, and like the whole sense of it is, it's like, and like because I've been reading in Japanese, so I'm naturally slower with reading it. But I think it's designed in a way where you can just like pause on a page, and you could say that about any manga. You could say that about Berserk because of how detailed the art is, right? But like you're still engaged in the story to the point you're invited, like it's a page turner.
Yeah.
Whereas Yotsuba as a manga invites you to like just pause and just chill. So maybe there's that aspect can be lost, like you lose the control of time. And there are certain things that you lose when you adapt, like let's say you want to keep the gender reveal of a character. It's easier to do it in manga because you know there are fewer tells. You can still have them talk a lot and it's not obvious.
Yeah, they're voice actor.
Voice actor. And I mean, obviously, you ever think of like, okay, maybe they're like that's something Kino's Journey run into, right? Because it's like they try to keep the reveal of the first light novel doesn't reveal Kino's gender until the second last story of the first light novel. And even then, it's not 100% obvious it's Kino until the end of the story. They try and do the same thing with the fourth episode of the anime, they try and do things of, she has a boyish design and like the character. It's very common for, shonen protagonists to be voiced by women anyway.
Right. Yeah. I thought Kino was a guy up until, I don't know, for however long.
Yeah, and so it's not impossible, but it does force you to, like, let's say, that works in the case of Kino because Kino's deliberately androgynous, right?
Yes.
And so you can translate that androgenity. How would you make it now?
Androgyny?
Androgyny, yeah. I'm going to say the androgynous nature of Kino. You can translate it, but let's say the reveal of the gender is just meant to be kept a secret from the audience, but everyone else knows. That's much harder to do,
yes.
So, and there is stuff that you can only do in manga, and so you would lose stuff in translation. But I don't think there's anything you can't adapt. There's stuff you can adapt, and it wouldn't be the same. But you'd have to. Right. It's fine. It's not going to be the same anyway. You gotta make your
of course.
thing.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a time that people said that JoJo was unadaptable.
Really? Yeah, they did.
I mean, like you had the '90s OVA, but people would point to like Araki's very detailed and like line work and say like, oh, this can never be adapted. Like part 4 can never be adapted. And still, even now, people still are like, part 7 will never really work as an anime.
I could see people being like that with, even just stuff like part 6, given how much people shit on how it looked, even though it looked fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I guess with JoJo, it's interesting because it like, they do have like 3 different directors now, I guess, on the projects. So like now you kind of have an interesting conversation of like, which one do you feel like is the best kind of adapted part? Because they all kind of adapt it a little bit differently.
JoJo is an interesting example too, because the JoJo has just changed so much over the manga's run.
Yeah.
Like an individual part can change. I like the anime's approach to adapting the changes in Araki's art style, where each part they will go for the art style that was prominent towards the end of that particular part.
Yeah, especially with like part 4 is very kind of the famous one example.
Famous shift, where it became much more like slender and bishonen and whatnot. It's like the thing of fans often like there's a quote people say a lot, like a lot of directors say, which is don't give fans what they want, give them what they need, because fans don't know what they want a lot of the time, because people say they want accurate, faithful anime adaptations. They want one-to-one, they want the panels to be exactly as it is,
right?
And everything like that. But when that happens, they also hate it, because look what happened with Way of the House Husband. That is, if you're talking about being faithful to the manga, that is as faithful as you can get to a manga without it just being also in black and white.
Yeah.
and
people
hated
called it lazy. Yeah, people,
people called it lazy because they wanted quote unquote animation.
Animation.
They wanted it to move.
There's
And
no animation
look,
in a manga.
It's fine. It's fine if that's what you wanted, right?
Sure.
That's fine.
But be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the thing. People don't know how to articulate what they wish for, which is another problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's interesting to me because like going back to JoJo, like I hated part 3, like the adaptation when I was watching it, because it was, they kind of went for kind of a, 2 chapters per episode structure.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which, the original chapters of part 3, you read pretty quick. Like,
yeah.
The famous example is like the sun. Like that fight is like a really one-off kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you read it in like 5 minutes and kind of move on. Yeah. The anime adapted it into a full 30-minute episode, and you just have to sit there and watch it, and you're like, oh my god. Whereas like part 4, when I started reading part 4, I wouldn't like, which granted I started reading it right after part 3 and I wasn't feeling it. But when I went to watch the adaptation, people were kind of clowning on the adaptation because they're like, oh, it's got like the record scratch and like the 90s style. It's just, so like when I go check it out, just to kind of see what they were talking about, like I ended up really liking that adaptation much more than, part 3. And it takes a lot of liberties where like it does a lot of, interesting kind of screen transition effects.
It also restructures the story content a lot. It moves individual things around to make flow better, or it adds the epilogue, the almost everyone's seen at the epilogue,
and then you get like and then you get people that like part 5, which it was a lot more accurate, I guess. It kind of is like a middle ground between part 4 and part 3. And then they, like Sai said, they shit on part 6, even though it's relatively accurate, just because it doesn't move quite as much as part 5 did. It's just like, what are you gonna do?
Well, there are also things like obviously you're not going to be able to adapt like a 40-hour long like visual novel into a 1 or 2 core anime and be able to keep all of it, because that's not
300-hour one.
Yeah, that's not how time works. So you are going to need to cut stuff out. And yeah, when you search for like longer ones, I'll get to fucking Umineko eventually, but I know people do say that for a variety of reasons. Partially its length, partially its story structure, partially just with like some meta aspects to it, I guess, and some of the mechanics in it, that it only makes sense really in a visual novel format. I have no idea if that's fucking true.
I have heard people say that the manga is good for Umineko.
The manga looks pretty good from what I've seen of it. But there's stuff like I think like the red text meme or whatever the fuck, everything I say in red is true. That's obviously something you can't do in an anime where there's no text. Which is why it's never been adapted into an anime.
Wait.
people Umineko fans really hate the anime adaptation. And
it's similar with I know Tsukihime.
It's
got the same kind of meme going on.
Higurashi, I'll probably hate the anime adaptation of that when I'm done with the visual novel.
Well, visual novels are their own thing, again, because it's similar to manga in a way, because there are the similarities, right? There are the ways the Venn diagram of anime and visual novels is closer than something like light novels and anime, and so you can get stuck in that space in between. And maybe it's also because it's less common to adapt to visual novels the way it is to adapt to manga.
Especially nowadays, There aren't really a lot of visual novel adaptations coming out. In part because visual novels just aren't as popular anymore, But it's also a matter of, I think an interesting example is Clannad, because the way like Clannad is structured is you go through all these arcs and you get like the fucking orbs or whatever in the visual novel. And they kind of try to do that in the anime. I still don't know what the fuck was happening.
I haven't finished
at that
Clannad
ending
yet. So.
Yeah, that it didn't translate quite as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't.
It's
like
it happens.
It happens. It's in there.
Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, that's fucking it's over. Another interesting example is that I've never seen anyone shit on Steins Gate as being a bad adaptation of the visual novel, like I have seen people do with Keyworks, with like Clannad, with Air, with Canon. And it's interesting because, again, I think the anime is so fucking popular, and I don't think anywhere near as many people have played the visual novel, especially not when the anime first came out. Which, again, it kind of goes back to the whole thing of like, it really matters, what were you exposed to first, effectively?
The nature of a video game, even something like a visual novel, the nature of it, anything that has the player's interaction alters the outcome is hard to show in linear narratives like manga or anime, where you can't really do that. Unless you do choose your own adventure like this podcast. Click here to vote on what Ghost will say next.
Real quick, before we go, do have a quick announcement we want to make. We are now accepting fan mail. That's right. Be sure to send your fan mail to Mumi's address at Texas.
Wait, what the fuck? Who gave me my address?
I did.